Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our best emotional stories. Now, let's dive into this amazing tale. The military base was buzzing with its usual morning activity when Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the transport vehicle. She was barely 5 feet tall and had a slim build that made her look more like a college student than a soldier. Her uniform seemed slightly too big for her frame, and she carried her duffel bag with both hands, instead of slinging it over one shoulder like the others did. A group of soldiers stood near the barracks entrance, watching the new arrivals. They had seen many recruits come and go, but Sarah immediately caught their attention for all the wrong reasons. One of them, a tall man named Jackson, elbowed his friend and whispered something. Soon, quiet laughter spread through the group. Sarah noticed the stares but kept her eyes forward. She had dealt with this kind of reaction her entire military career. People always judged her based on her appearance before knowing anything about her capabilities. She walked past the group with steady steps, her face showing no emotion. Inside the barracks, Sarah found her assigned bunk and began unpacking her belongings. Other soldiers in the room exchanged glances. A woman named Rebecca leaned against the doorframe and watched Sarah struggle to reach the top shelf of her locker. Rebecca smirked and turned to her friend, making a comment about how someone so small should not be in combat units. The whispers and quiet jokes continued throughout the day. During lunch in the mess hall, Sarah sat alone at a corner table. She ate her food slowly, aware of the occasional glances thrown her way. Some soldiers pointed in her direction while talking to their friends. The laughter that followed made it clear what they were discussing. Later that afternoon, during equipment check, Sarah had to ask for help reaching supplies on a high shelf. The soldier who helped her made a sarcastic comment about needing a step stool. Others nearby laughed. Sarah thanked him politely and moved on, her face still showing no reaction to the mockery. By evening, word had spread throughout the entire base about the unusually small soldier in Bravo Company. Soldiers who had not even met her already had opinions. Some questioned how she passed the physical requirements. Others wondered if standards were being lowered. A few made jokes about her being assigned to desk duty instead of field operations. Sarah went to bed that first night listening to whispered conversations around her. She stared at the ceiling, her hands folded on her chest. This was not new to her. She had faced similar situations before. What these soldiers did not know was that Sarah carried secrets from her past assignments. Secrets that would soon shock everyone on this base. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sarah was ready for whatever came next. The next morning arrived with the harsh sound of the wake-up alarm at 5 o'clock. Sarah was already awake, sitting on her bunk with her boots laced and uniform perfectly pressed. She had learned long ago that being early meant fewer opportunities for criticism. The training grounds were located behind the main barracks building. Sergeant Williams, a muscular man with over 20 years of service, stood at the center of the field with his arms crossed. He was known for being tough but fair, and he ran the morning physical training sessions with military precision. As soldiers gathered in formation, Sarah took her place in the back row. She could feel eyes on her again. Jackson stood a few spots away, already grinning at his friends. When Sergeant Williams called for attention, the group fell silent. The morning started with running drills. Sergeant Williams led the group on a 5-mile run around the base perimeter. Sarah kept pace with the main group, her breathing steady and controlled. Some of the soldiers who had laughed at her the previous day seemed surprised that she was keeping up. Jackson, however, remained confident that she would eventually fall behind. After the run came obstacle course training. The course included rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling under barbed wire, and navigating through mud pits. This was where many soldiers expected Sarah to struggle. The walls were 8 feet high, and the ropes required significant upper body strength. Sarah approached the first obstacle, a rope climb that extended 20 feet into the air. Several soldiers paused their own training to watch. Rebecca nudged her friend and said this would be entertaining. Jackson made a bet with another soldier that Sarah would not make it past the third obstacle. What happened next surprised everyone. Sarah grabbed the rope and began climbing with smooth, efficient movements. Her technique was flawless, using her legs to grip and push while her arms pulled. She reached the top faster than many of the larger soldiers had done earlier. When she descended and moved to the next obstacle, the watching soldiers fell quiet. At the 8-foot wall, Sarah did not hesitate. She ran at full speed, planted one foot on the wall, and used her momentum to grab the top edge. With one quick pull, she was over. Her movements were so fluid that it looked effortless. Some soldiers watching began to wonder if they had misjudged her. Throughout the obstacle course, Sarah completed each challenge with precision. She crawled under the barbed wire without snagging her uniform. She crossed the balance beams without faltering. She navigated the mud pit faster than soldiers twice her size. By the time she finished, her uniform was covered in dirt. She was barely breathing hard. Sergeant Williams watched Sarah complete the course and made a note on his clipboard. He said nothing, but his expression showed he was impressed. The other soldiers began whispering among themselves. Maybe this small soldier was more capable than she appeared. However, not everyone was convinced. Jackson shook his head and told his friends that obstacle courses were different from real combat situations. Rebecca agreed, saying that physical training did not prove anything about actual fighting ability. The mockery had decreased, but doubt remained. Sarah knew that actions spoke louder than words, and she was just getting started. 2 days after the obstacle course performance, Bravo Company was scheduled for shooting range qualification. This was a critical evaluation that every soldier had to pass regularly. The range was located on the far side of the base, surrounded by hills that blocked sound from traveling to nearby areas. Soldiers arrived at the range, carrying their rifles and ammunition. The morning air was cool, and the smell of gun oil filled the space. Rangemaster Thompson, a veteran with gray hair and steady hands, supervised all shooting activities. He was known for his strict safety, protocols, and high standards. The qualification course required soldiers to hit targets at various distances, from 50 meters to 300 meters. Each soldier had to achieve a minimum score to pass. Anything below 70% meant additional training and requalification. Scores above 90% earned recognition as expert marksman. Jackson was among the first to shoot. He positioned himself at the firing line, loaded his rifle, and took aim. His shots were decent, hitting most targets but missing a few at longer distances. When he finished, his score was 78%. Respectable, but nothing special. He seemed satisfied and joined his friends to watch others shoot. Rebecca went next and scored 81%. She was pleased with her performance and made a comment about how real soldiers performed under pressure. Several others took their turns, with scores ranging from 70 to 85%. The atmosphere was competitive but relaxed. Then Sarah stepped up to the firing line. The conversations around the range quieted down. Soldiers who had been cleaning their rifles or checking their equipment paused to watch. Some exchanged knowing glances, expecting her to struggle with the weapon's recoil. Rangemaster Thompson handed Sarah her ammunition and pointed to the targets downrange. Sarah loaded her rifle with smooth, practiced movements. She settled into position, her body alignment perfect. Her breathing slowed as she focused on the first target. The first shot rang out. Direct hit on the center target at 50 meters. Sarah adjusted slightly and fired again. Another perfect hit. She continued firing with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark. The soldiers watching began paying closer attention as the targets moved to farther distances. Sarah's accuracy remained consistent. At 100 meters, she hit every target dead center. At 200 meters, her shots continued landing exactly where she aimed. The range fell completely silent except for the sound of her rifle firing. When Sarah reached the 300-meter targets, even Rangemaster Thompson leaned forward to watch more carefully. These distant targets were challenging for experienced soldiers. Wind, bullet drop, and breathing all affected accuracy at this range. Many soldiers missed several shots at this distance. Sarah fired her first shot at 300 meters. The target indicator showed a perfect center hit. She fired again. Another perfect hit. Shot after shot landed exactly on target. When she finished her final round, The range remained silent for a moment. Rangemaster Thompson checked his scoring tablet twice, not believing what he was seeing. He walked over to Sarah and showed her the score. 100%. Perfect score. Every single shot had hit the center of its target. This was extremely rare, even among the best soldiers on the base. Jackson's mouth hung open. Rebecca stopped smiling. The other soldiers stared at Sarah with new expressions on their faces. This small woman they had mocked just outperformed every single one of them. Rangemaster Thompson announced her score loud enough for everyone to hear, and he added that this was the first perfect score he had seen in over 3 years. Sarah unloaded her rifle, cleared the chamber, and handed it back to the rangemaster. She walked away from the firing line without saying a word, her face showing no pride or arrogance. Just another day of work for her. After Sarah's perfect shooting score, the atmosphere in the barracks shifted slightly. Some soldiers became curious about her background, while others remained skeptical. Jackson insisted that shooting targets was different from actual combat situations. He told anyone who would listen that size and strength mattered more in real fights. The following week, they brought hand-to-hand combat training. This was the moment Jackson had been waiting for. He was confident that physical confrontations would expose Sarah's limitations. The training took place in the base gym, where thick mats covered the floor and punching bags hung from the ceiling. Instructor Martinez ran the combat training program. He was a former Special Forces soldier with expertise in multiple fighting styles. He believed that proper technique could overcome size disadvantages. But he also knew that real combat was unpredictable and brutal. The session began with basic drills and defensive movements. Soldiers paired up to practice blocks, strikes, and escapes. Sarah was partnered with a soldier named Davis, who was respectful but clearly holding back during their practice. He treated her carefully, as if she might break from full contact. After basic drills, Instructor Martinez announced sparring matches. This was full contact training with protective gear, where soldiers could test their skills against each other. The matches were not about winning or losing, but about learning and improving. However, competitiveness always crept in. Jackson volunteered to spar first. He faced another large soldier, and the match was aggressive. With both men throwing powerful strikes and attempting takedowns, the fight ended with Jackson winning by pinning his opponent. He stood up looking satisfied and scanned the room, his eyes landing on Sarah. Several more matches took place. Rebecca fought well against her opponent, using speed to compensate for less strength. Other soldiers showed varying levels of skill, some clearly more experienced than others. The gym echoed with the sounds of bodies hitting mats and instructors giving corrections. Then Instructor Martinez called Sarah to the mat. The room's energy changed immediately. Soldiers stopped their individual training to watch. Jackson whispered to his friends, predicting this would not go well for her. Martinez asked for a volunteer to spar with Sarah. Before anyone could respond, Jackson stepped forward. He claimed he wanted to help Sarah learn proper defensive techniques. Martinez looked at Sarah, asking if she was comfortable with the matchup. Sarah simply nodded and moved to the center of the mat. Both fighters put on protective headgear and gloves. Jackson stood across from Sarah, at least a foot taller and probably 80 pounds heavier. He bounced on his feet, looking confident. Martinez reminded both fighters to show control and respect. Then he signaled for them to begin. Jackson moved forward with a basic jab combination, expecting Sarah to back away. Instead, she slipped to the side with minimal movement, making his punches miss by inches. He tried again with more power, but Sarah was not where his fists traveled. Her footwork was exceptional, positioning her body at angles that made his size advantage irrelevant. Growing frustrated, Jackson attempted a takedown, rushing forward to grab Sarah. She used his momentum against him. Stepping aside and guiding his movement, Jackson stumbled forward, off balance. Before he could recover, Sarah was behind him, demonstrating a control position that would have ended a real fight. Martinez called for them to reset. Jackson's face was red, whether from exertion or embarrassment was unclear. They began again, and this time Jackson attacked with more aggression. He threw combinations of punches and kicks, trying to overwhelm Sarah with speed and power. Sarah remained calm, her movements efficient and precise. She blocked what needed blocking, avoided what needed avoiding, and countered with quick, controlled strikes that found their targets. Every time Jackson committed to an attack, Sarah exploited the opening. Within 2 minutes, Jackson was breathing heavily while Sarah looked completely composed. The match continued for another minute before Martinez called it to an end. He pointed out several technical lessons from the sparring session, praising Sarah's technique and control. Jackson walked off the mat without looking at anyone, heading straight to get water. The watching soldiers stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. 3 weeks after Sarah arrived at the base, word spread that Colonel Harrison would be conducting his quarterly inspection and address. Colonel Harrison was the base commander, a decorated officer with over 30 years of military service. His inspections were thorough. His addresses were known for being direct and meaningful. The entire base prepared for his visit. Barracks were cleaned until they sparkled. Uniforms were pressed to perfection. Equipment was organized and accounted for. Every soldier knew that Colonel Harrison noticed details, and nobody wanted to be the one caught with substandard preparation. On the day of the inspection, all units assembled in the main parade ground. Hundreds of soldiers stood in perfect formation, organized by company and platoon. The morning sun was bright, and the air carried a sense of nervous energy. Officers walked between the rows, making final checks of their troops. Colonel Harrison arrived in a military vehicle, accompanied by his senior staff. He was a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence. His uniform displayed numerous medals and ribbons, evidence of a distinguished career. He stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the assembly. Every soldier stood even straighter. The inspection began with Colonel Harrison walking through the formations. He stopped occasionally to ask soldiers questions about their duties, training, or equipment. His questions were fair, but tested whether soldiers truly understood their roles. Some soldiers answered confidently, while others stumbled over their words. When the colonel reached Bravo Company, he paused longer than usual. His eyes moved across the ranks. And then he noticed Sarah. She stood in formation like everyone else, her uniform impeccable and her posture perfect. Colonel Harrison stepped closer and stood directly in front of her. The colonel asked Sarah her name, rank, and when she had arrived at the base, Sarah answered each question clearly and respectfully. Harrison studied her face for a moment, and something seemed to register in his expression. He asked Sarah if she had previously served in overseas operations. Sarah confirmed that she had. A slight smile crossed the colonel's face. He asked Sarah if she had been part of Operation Desert Sentinel, a classified mission that took place 2 years earlier in a hostile region. Sarah confirmed her participation. The soldiers around them had no idea what they were discussing, but the colonel's tone suggested this was significant. Colonel Harrison then asked Sarah one more question. He asked if she had been assigned to special reconnaissance operations during that deployment. Sarah answered yes. The colonel nodded slowly, then returned to the platform to address the entire assembly. After completing his inspection remarks, Colonel Harrison did something unexpected. He asked for everyone's attention for a special recognition. He explained that military service often meant that the most significant contributions remained unknown to fellow soldiers. He said that classified operations required soldiers to stay silent about their achievements, even when they deserved recognition. The colonel then asked Sarah to step forward. Confused murmurs rippled through the formations. Sarah walked to the front and stood at attention before the platform. Jackson and Rebecca exchanged puzzled looks. What was happening? Colonel Harrison pulled out a document from his folder. He explained that Sarah had served in one of the most dangerous regions in the world, operating behind enemy lines for months. He stated that due to recent declassification of certain information, he could now share some details about her service record. The parade ground fell completely silent. Every soldier leaned forward slightly, straining to hear every word. Colonel Harrison began reading from Sarah's file. He described how she had completed 18 reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory. He mentioned her role in identifying and tracking high-value targets. Then came the statement that changed everything. Colonel Harrison read that Sarah had been directly involved in operations that resulted in the neutralization of 37 enemy combatants. Her actions had prevented multiple planned attacks against Allied forces and saved countless lives. Her kill count was among the highest in her unit, and she had received several commendations that remained classified until now. The entire assembly stood frozen. 37 confirmed kills. This small woman they had mocked and underestimated had more combat experience and success than most soldiers would see in their entire careers. Jackson's face went pale. Rebecca's eyes were wide with shock. Soldiers who had laughed at Sarah just weeks ago now stared at her with completely different expressions. Colonel Harrison concluded by saying that Sarah represented what true warriors looked like. They came in all sizes and backgrounds, and judging them by appearance was a mistake. He reminded everyone that respect was earned through actions, not assumptions. Sarah saluted the colonel, then returned to her position in formation, walking past soldiers who now looked at her with awe and respect. After Colonel Harrison's revelation, everything changed for Sarah at the base. The transformation was not immediate, but it was profound. Soldiers who had whispered jokes about her size now whispered about her classified missions. The mockery turned into curiosity, then respect, and finally, admiration. That evening in the mess hall, Sarah entered to find the atmosphere completely different. Instead of eating alone at a corner table, several soldiers invited her to join them. They wanted to hear about her experiences, though they understood much of it remained classified. Sarah accepted one invitation and sat with a group that included some younger soldiers who looked at her with genuine respect. Jackson approached Sarah's table, his earlier confidence replaced with humility. He stood awkwardly for a moment before apologizing for his previous behavior. He admitted that he had judged her unfairly and had learned an important lesson about assumptions. Sarah listened without anger or resentment. She told Jackson that she understood his reaction was common and that she hoped he would treat future soldiers with more openness. Rebecca also apologized, explaining that she had felt threatened by Sarah's presence without understanding why. She recognized now that her own insecurities had caused her to lash out. Sarah accepted her apology as well, suggesting they could start fresh. Rebecca nodded gratefully, feeling genuine shame for how she had acted. Over the following weeks, Sarah became an unofficial mentor to many soldiers on the base. Her combat experience and tactical knowledge were invaluable, especially to those preparing for deployments. She ran voluntary training sessions on situational awareness, survival techniques, and mental preparation for combat situations. During one training session, Sarah explained that her size had actually been an advantage in reconnaissance operations. She could move through tight spaces, appeared less threatening to civilians during intelligence gathering, was underestimated by enemies who focused on larger targets. She taught the soldiers that every physical characteristic could be turned into an advantage with the right mindset and training. Sergeant Williams requested Sarah's assistance with advanced training programs. She helped design more realistic combat scenarios and provided insights from her field experience. Rangemaster Thompson asked her to mentor struggling shooters, and her patient instruction helped several soldiers improve their marksmanship scores significantly. The base newspaper ran a feature article about Sarah's service, with permission from military intelligence after certain details were cleared for release. The article discussed how special operations required diverse skill sets and how traditional expectations about soldiers were evolving. Sarah's story became part of training materials about unconscious bias and the importance of evaluating soldiers based on capabilities rather than appearances. Jackson became one of Sarah's most dedicated students. He asked her to review his combat techniques and point out weaknesses. Sarah worked with him regularly, helping him improve his efficiency and control. Their training partnership became an example of how respect and humility could transform relationships. Several months later, when new recruits arrived at the base, Sarah noticed some soldiers making the same kinds of judgments about others based on appearance. She intervened immediately, sharing her own experience of being underestimated. She reminded them that every soldier deserved a chance to prove themselves through actions, not appearances. One evening, Sarah stood outside the barracks looking at the sunset. Rebecca joined her, and they talked about their respective paths to military service. Rebecca mentioned how much she had grown from knowing Sarah, and how the experience had changed her perspective on many things. Sarah smiled and said that growth was what military service was really about. Not just for defense purposes, but for personal development. The base commander eventually selected Sarah for an instructor position at the military's Advanced Combat Training Facility. Before she left, the entire unit gathered for a farewell ceremony. Soldiers who had once laughed at her now gave testimonials about what they had learned from her. Jackson spoke about how she had taught him that true strength came from skill, discipline, and character rather than just physical size. Sarah addressed the assembly one final time. She thanked them for the opportunity to serve alongside them and reminded everyone that they all had unique strengths to contribute. She encouraged them to look beyond surface judgments and to support each other regardless of differences. She concluded by saying that the military was strongest when it valued capability over appearance and character over assumptions. As Sarah's transport vehicle pulled away from the base, soldiers lined the road to salute her departure. The small woman who had arrived to Mockery was leaving as one of the most respected soldiers ever stationed there. Her legacy would remain long after she left, a reminder that heroes come in all forms, and that true warriors are measured by their actions, courage, and skill rather than their size. The laughter that once echoed through the barracks had been replaced with admiration, and the lessons learned would influence how these soldiers treated others for the rest of their careers.